So I want to introduce a few more panelists here. I want to bring on Shaw, Kevin Owoki, Linda, and Ken as our panelists, and moderating this panel will be Tina. And we're going to get into how do we actually bring back the AI and DAOs. Tina, take it away.
All right. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Congratulations, ETH Global's account has been encumbered by the pirate ship. And we have many friends where we collected a set of questions, and where, as a dictator, I arbitrarily decided there is one and the only one best question will be discussed and debated in this 30 minutes. But before we rush right into it, gotta keep some suspense. The question is so good. So we're gonna start with some basic calibration questions. So rapid fire, what can today's AI agent capability uniquely unlock in the DAO context, and what can it not solve? Kevin, I'm looking at you, starting from you.
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm interested in seeing AI agents solve is DAOs have a lot of context passing around in their Discords and their governance forums. And my stats on the Gitcoin governance forum are pretty insane. I have 250 posts in 3 days of read time. But you can't expect that of everyone that's involved in Gitcoin DAO. And so what I'm really interested in AI agents able to do is basically pull out the information that's relevant to each participant and give them a customized summary of what's going on in the DAO so that they can have an overview of everything that's happening all across the ecosystem. So that's where I would like to start using AI in the DAOs that I'm involved with.
I think we can kind of break this down into two parts. One is like generally all organizations, I think, have certain communication problems, and DAOs just kind of extrapolate that because they're like, we're all implicitly remote. There's lots and lots more people in like the Slack than just your small team, so to speak. And you have like a lot of like one-to-many communication relationships. So generally, like you could imagine if you're part of a really big org, you're kind of shielded from a lot of the communication that's happening by hierarchy. And when you get rid of that hierarchy and everyone just can be in any chat, then you start to get a lot more communication. And I think it just becomes untenable at some scale to be able to sift through all of the conversations that are coming at you, especially if people can just like start a conversation with you at any point. And I don't know about you guys, but like I get way too many messages and I just cannot process all of them every day. It could be my full-time job and it still wouldn't be enough. So I think that's like definitely part of it, is that like AIs are not necessarily right now, like it's not the best thing for every single level of the stack, but definitely like to Owoki's point, like if you could summarize the important stuff that's happening, hey, here's the things I really care about. Anybody who's like talking about things relevant to me or like to these things that I need to know, like please just make a summary of that for me every day and give that to me. Like that would be like the bare minimum. But I don't think this is like really a DAO problem. This is just like a, general like data information flow problem of organizations. And I think that probably traditional corporations have like found a way to work together that isolates this problem, but that leads to a lot of like different kind of problem in hierarchy where like people don't see what the other teams are working on and stuff. So it's like, like any kind of thing where you have like a work group model, you probably want to know what the other work groups are actually working on, so you're not double working. And so I think that's just like the general organizational problems. And because we have this unique feature of tending to like congregate in Telegram or Discord or these like easy to throw a bot in there and track what's going on kind of spaces, there's like it's like a nice sandbox for solving a lot of these problems that might not be so easy to solve if you work in like a cubicle in a large company. But the other part of this is like what's unique to DAOs. Well, you like the stuff that's really there is more like true autonomy for like, well, if we're starting an unincorporated nonprofit association and we don't want any of us to take the responsibility for that, saying like, okay, cool, code is law, and here's this system that's actually extremely dynamic and can do all kinds of different stuff, and I it's not me, it's not any of us, it's just performing administrative function, has like obviously a lot of appeal. And I think that a smart contract by itself, just it's very hard to jam all of the different externalities, like all of the different realities of our situations into that thing. But you could, if you can have an AI system that can sort of smooth over some of that stuff, especially turning like unstructured, just people chatting into like a structured decision, then obviously there's a lot of appeal there. So, it's hard to say like when will AIs make decisions for us, but certainly like the data information, like processing problems, and as well as like kind of collecting and normalizing things into a usable state for decision making are like, very obvious.
So I think a lot about the intersection of AI agents and work, because we built a Bounties platform on Farcaster. And so something that's really interesting is you can have this agent proactively coming up with what are things that are needed to get done in this DAO. It has all of the context, as everyone mentioned, and it can say, like, here's what's missing, here's the best people to work on it. So it can start coordinating people. It can then start raising funds and saying like, oh, wait, we actually need a budget to create this. And it can like spec out the entire process and like break it up into different pieces. So it's kind of like a project manager. And then it can just start posting these bounties and people can now build up reputation for this work. So it's just this like all-knowing project manager, and it can just be really proactive in getting things done. So we're pretty excited by that and think that like basically every DAO is going to eventually have some version of this that is going to be like a trusty little sidekick. And people can also be like, oh, I'm looking to earn $1,000 in this DAO. Like, where's a place I can get started? And it just talks to this agent and can be like, here's the best place where you can get started. These are the things that are relevant to your own skill set and things you've posted in the past. So super excited by agents and DAOs.
I think to build off of Linda's point, I think it's really cool to even think about the other way around of like, what are the outcomes that we want to see and how do we actually build backwards from there, right? So I think one thing that's been, maybe this is maybe like jumping too far ahead, but I think like something that's been really cool is thinking about like retro funding and how people want to be rewarded for the work that they do, but who evaluates that? And I think when we think about like sometimes politics at play, like who's there, how we actually define like what proper outcomes are, right? I think if we're able to sort of more objectively look at like what are the ideal outcomes for the organization, then we can kind of think like, okay, well, who has actually made significant strides towards this, right? If there's a spec and we're all building towards a spec, right? Like who has actually contributed to it and how can we actually work backwards from there? So a lot of really fun things I think we can do with incentives.
One of the things that, oh, go ahead, Vitalik. One of the things that Shaw, you and I had talked a little bit about was the idea of taking retro funding, which is currently happening in some ecosystems on a quarterly or every other quarter basis, and starting to do it more on like a weekly basis. And the idea is that would provide a tighter feedback loop where contributors would get rewarded more often than they would on a quarterly or every half year round, which allows them to justify spending more time on the DAO and gets them more feedback about what they've been working on. And so just tighter feedback loops on rounds that are retro funding is an idea that we've sort of kicked around. And I think I'd be curious to see if anyone's going to be piloting that anytime soon.
I mean, certainly we've been exploring that. I know Vitalik, you were just presenting on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I've suggested to Optimism, I think at least a couple of times that I think there should be like part of the retro process that is just automated and guaranteed and according to kind of long-standing rules. And the reason why, right, is because the whole underlying theory of retro funding is that it's supposed to motivate people to work or to invest by the expectation that work is going to get rewarded later, right? But then if that you're basically just like randomly doing rounds whenever you feel like it, and like sometimes the team messes up and they like bloat up their scope, and like you have the equivalent of Pectra, and then it turns out the round is like 7 months late, right? Then like it doesn't give people a stability that they need, right? And so I think making these things more automated, more institutionalized, making the commitments to them be more of like ongoing commitments as opposed to one-time donations. Like I think these are all steps in a good direction, and that I think we should be moving towards real time.
So Kevin, you'll be glad to hear that our entire encumbered hacker house will be retroactively evaluated from code, including private dependencies, to social contribution to lives. So we'll see how this experiment pan out in the next month. Well, moving on to another calibration question. I didn't expect that one to take quite an interesting turn. What do you absolutely not want to see in DAOs today using automation, using what technology we have? That you consider, okay, this would be a bad idea. Limited time scope to 1 year, this year, 2025. What you probably would not advise us trying.
I could just talk about it in terms of we had a bunch of AI agents posting bounties on our platform, and then immediately a bunch of people were farming the agent for money. So I would not advise like large sums of money being given to the AI agent to then be given out. Maybe we could do like really small experiments, but we've kind of seen with some of the cases in the past where it's like, hey, like under no circumstance can this agent give out money, and then people are able to kind of like farm it or make attempts. So I would just be really cautious around like giving this one agent like millions of dollars to be giving out to members of the DAO.
I'll go next. Go ahead, Tina. I'll just start with something that I'm already seeing, which is only a mild annoyance, but I'm already starting to see AI slop in my replies and on my governance forums, and I just think it's such a sign of like disrespect for my time that you're sending me these shitty spammy like AI induced messages. I'm talking about like the royal we, like sending them out to people, and I feel like we had this fantasy with AI that it was going to help us collapse context and pull more signal from the noise. But what I'm seeing in the meantime is just like more crappy takes and more like low effort bots. And I'm feeling more overwhelmed by them. And so I'm hoping to see more high signal bots and a move towards bots that are mindfully and thoughtfully deployed to add value, as opposed to just like trained on the worst use cases and increasing the amount of spam going across the internet. So that's something that I don't want to see.
I sort of think that the in a world of slot bots, maybe the most valuable product is a slot bot filter, and definitely like AI is kind of like, it's a fire hose, but it can also be like a funnel. And we've seen just more of the value in like, especially when nobody has a funnel, just being able to fire hose it. But I hope that like by kind of accelerating the annoyance of bots that are not so smart that they're indistinguishable from humans yet, it kind of causes us to start thinking about the opposite, like you know, they're sort of like red teaming the social network. How would we legitimately stop that? And I do think that there are solutions to that, but they sort of require us like starting to build those tools and like maybe even figure out how to make money off of that as a product. Definitely, I want like an AI version of Twitter that just filters all the crap and just shows you what I want to see, you know.
So the one thing I've really enjoyed about DAOs, and like sort of in the same vein as like everything you guys just said, there's such a human part of like organizations and how, you know, we come together to make decisions and how we work with one another. There's like social contracts as to like responsibility, accountability, and I feel like I can see like trends like starting to kind of head into this idea that like, you know, everything can be objective, everything can sort of just be like abstracted away, and like decisions are decisions. And it's really tough when you sort of are a part of a DAO and you're engaging in these like fruitful conversations about what you want to see and like what, as we're vision setting and North Starring, how we can make decisions together. It's really, and to Kevin's point and to Shaw's point, right? Like it's really hard to like go through like a chunk of text of just like, I know you just sort of like transcribed everything and then sort of like asked ChatGPT like, hey, like how do I best respond to this to like get to this answer? And I get it, right? It's a lot. It's a lot of information, but I think it's really, I guess like at least I don't feel like we're at a place yet where within a DAO to just like governance in general, like being able to have fruitful conversations without like, I guess like empathy. I don't know, maybe that's the wrong word here, but it is tough, at least on my end, to have engaged with without like some like human input and insight and like responsiveness.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing and understanding the limitation. I was going to ask one more calibration question, then I realized I may be running out of time. So that'll be, we can always do it next time. So the main question that actually we selected from our Hacker House is, what is the A in DAO? Is the desired ideal of a DAO autonomous or just automated? Are we truly striving for autonomy, or are we simply automating the existing power structures?
So I think, I personally am more interested in autonomous than I am in automated, right? And I think, this is like one of those interesting divides, right? Basically, yeah, where like if you think about what the word autonomous means in any other context, like if you think about, say, a territory of a country being autonomous, right? Like that means like the control over the thing is inside the thing, right? Automated generally means like basically, yeah, that there's no humans involved in the operation of the thing, right? And like if something is fully automated, then there's the question of like, is it even an organization, right? And to me, yeah, the ultimate goal of this all is to like satisfy the goals of the people who are creating these things. And I think in any realistic case, that's going to involve some form of constant involvement, right? And so, yeah, like to me, the ultimate driver of all of this ultimately is creating power structures that allow power to be distributed and that allow power to be held by different groups of people and different communities that care about different things, and for that to be compatible with efficient governance. And I think AI is an excellent tool to enable that.
Any other takers? Which A do you prefer, or do you agree or disagree? I would like to see some.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the organization itself. I've been part of DAOs where it's like a few people, and then I've been part of Optimism where there's two different houses and there's so many people. So I think like having things be automated when you can't keep up with all the information, that's really helpful. But if you're just a really small DAO, I don't necessarily think you need to like automate away a lot of interactions with other people. In terms of the autonomous part, I've kind of thought a lot about the like, oh, does this agent vote on people's behalf based off their past voting history and what they care about? And I think that gets to like a really scary point. So I'm a fan of like hybrid models and like progressive autonomization, just to make sure things are going well. Because I could see it being very dystopian when it's just like, okay, it's all these humans and their agents that are voting on their behalves, and we've now like trended this DAO towards some really strange outcome. So hybrid's pretty cool.
I've got a take. I think it's hard to talk about DAOs in the abstract because we're talking about such a big design space. And so when you're talking about autonomy and DAOs, I look at that as sort of a progression more than a 0 or a 1, more than a binary. And same thing with decentralization. These things are a spectrum. And so there are people who disagree with me and say, Kevin, those aren't DAOs if it's not fully decentralized and autonomous. That's not my definition. But like, imagine asking that question about organizations. You would say like, oh, are we talking about a church or a family or a company or a government? Like those are all different types of organizations, and they all have different needs for them. And I think the same is true of DAOs. Like I believe that the Ethereum layer 1 should be very decentralized, incredibly neutral and decentralized, because the issuance policy should not be able to be changed. ETH is money. But something like Blunt DAO I don't really care if that's autonomous. It's just about like, you know, meeting up in the park and like rolling blunts. So like there's just like a spectrum, and I think it depends on the use case of the DAO, whether it needs to be fully decentralized or autonomous, and whether we should progressively autonomize or decentralize these things over time. But now, because we have Ethereum, we can progressively decentralize and autonomize these things over time. And I think that as a pragmatist, someone who actually tries to apply this stuff, you can't be a maximalist, and you need to be able to progressively do it over time. So that's what I've been trying to do in my work with the DAOs that I work on.
Well, then let's dive a little bit deeper, because I like how we're bringing up different type of organizations, and maybe there's a dial between the different A's, the automated versus autonomous. Let's just take a concrete example. Let's take Ethereum. Do you think that Ethereum is a DAO? Raise your hand, thumbs up, or raise your hand if you think Ethereum is a DAO in your mind, conceptually. There is no taker. Okay, let's go. All right, so I am a taker of Ethereum as a DAO. Great. So, in this thought experiment, let's say that 3 years from now, I'm not going above 3 years because I think we have different timeline estimate from a safetyist versus a accelerationist approach. So we're not stepping into that territory. I think 3 years is pretty safe as a thought experiment. Okay, what would Ethereum look like? And this does not apply to. This is not limited to just the technology, also in terms of the society, the community, and the impact that we can bring. So, given that we're talking about putting the A back into the DAOs, it can be putting the A back into all of the dehydrated DAOs because the DAO toolings didn't work in the previous generation, and rehydrating them so that it's blossoming DAOs, all over the place. Or it can be just like Lady AI CEO roll-up coordinator. That was a hackathon project that was really great, right? So it can be anything. So how would you apply the DAO technology advance onto the Ethereum, and what would you like to see happen in 3 years? Not 1 year, 3 years.
Okay, I can start. Oh no, Vitalik should definitely start.
No, and I'll just say, yeah, I would love to see, like large-scale DAOs that are funding big portions of like all open source software and hardware.
Yeah, for me, the reason why I didn't necessarily think that it's a DAO, like one piece is, there needs to also just be like some pool of funding that people can tap into to then self-organize. So it just feels very decentralized right now, right? Like you have the EF, but then everyone is building their own ecosystem too. So in some ideal world, Ethereum community has collectively decided to deposit funds, whether it be like a percentage of fees received by each of these protocols or whatever. There's like a pool of funds that some group can kind of act as delegates for. There's maybe agents involved that can help automate some of it. And people are able to propose different initiatives, and kind of like what's happening in DAOs right now. And they can just like, hey, I want to run like a marketing campaign right now for Ethereum. Here's my plan. Instead of going to the EF where there's, it's like a specific organization. This is like part of the DAO where a bunch of community members can sign off, or agents can sign off, and they can like keep track of all the work. They're more fair. They're not just giving out stuff to their friends necessarily if they're agents. So I would like to see some version of that, because right now, like as a small project, we've had to like go out and just like apply to a bunch of different grants, and we're kind of navigating the politics of it and all these things. But if it's just like the DAO and it's like agents, I think that's a pretty cool world to be part of.
I think generally, personally, I just like the idea that, oh, I have an idea, I have an open source project, I'd like to figure out how to administrate it and manage a community around it. And if I could like one click all of the tools so that I don't have to then go and like hire a whole team and focus on that, and I could just continue to focus on building, that would just make me happy personally. And I think that it would lower the friction for people to become like, for builders to run these things like profit making organizations. There's just like a lot of work that goes into making an organization that makes money. And so like a lot of that is just operational overhead. And if you could minimize that as much as possible, I think that you would just enable a lot more people to just kind of jump into building stuff, that they want without having to get totally sucked into like, being the CEO, not having time to build or whatever the use case is. And you could ostensibly have much smaller companies doing a lot more output. So maybe I'm selfish, but that's definitely the world I'd like to see. And so a lot of the governance tooling to me is just like general organizational community management tooling, etc. And it doesn't have to pertain to a DAO specifically, but I think that the DAO is kind of just a representation of this like lightweight, permissionless, press a button and get it. And if you get the whole tool stack with that to manage that effectively, that would be that'd be the product I want to see.
Yeah, Shaw, I feel your pain on that, having been down this road for a couple years, and I think you're taking all the pressure all around you really well. So, but I have some of the same needs, and one of the things that I think a lot about is how can we rally resources around Ethereum public goods and make sure that the dependencies of the Ethereum ecosystem are funded and the public goods in the Ethereum ecosystem is funded. And so I think we all think Ethereum's not a DAO, but if it was a DAO, I think that like funding the ecosystem's public goods would be part of the major charter of the DAO. And I'll just show really quickly that Gitcoin Grants 23 is coming up in March, and that's the 23rd quarterly public goods funding round for the Ethereum ecosystem that Gitcoin runs. So not the Ethereum official DAO, but a DAO that does organize Ethereum public goods funding. And for the first time ever, we're moving from quadratic funding to also doing retro funding and conviction voting and futarchy. And I think there's even a proposal to do another deep funding during GG23. So we're going multi-mechanism, and hopefully we'll be funding Ethereum public goods and demoing what some of this ecosystem support software could look like in a DAO era, but doing it for Ethereum because we all rely on Ethereum public goods to make it happen. So public goods are good, and we want to make sure that Ethereum public goods are solved. And I think that if Ethereum was a DAO, that would be one of the things the Ethereum DAO would do.
I agree with what everyone said. I mean, I feel like I don't have much to contribute here. I guess like funding is obviously a big part of it. If we have time, can I throw a hot take in here? I'm gonna play the other side. Okay, so what if in 3 years we actually see like block building and like MEV optimizations, like just like solvers just all go like full AI agents, right? And I haven't fully thought this through, so please don't roast me, or actually roast this. So if we think about this, right, what if one of the things that I think has been really interesting within Ethereum is that unfortunately or fortunately, for the love of the game, like it is highly politicized, right? There is a lot of social contracts and a lot of the social construct of who's ETH aligned, right? Like what does alignment actually mean here, especially within like the PBS space? But at the end of the day, right, like it is all optimizations for how much like revenue can be like seeped out of different parts of the stack. And I think if we are thinking about optimizations from like a financial perspective, we move everything into this like almost asymptotic extraction point where you can only optimize for so much, you can only extract so much into that it just has market pressures away from wanting to even just like have greater higher value transactions. So I guess as a thought experiment, like what if we actually have AI agents kind of like take over all of the block building relays stack? And then the optimizations kind of go to zero, and then to as little as possible, and then all the social sort of like, oh well, I'm ETH aligned, so I won't do XYZ, kind of go to zero because everyone is just really competing for like as little R profits as possible, and that kind of moves away. That would be fun to see. Hot take. Stop.
love it. I was about to ask the same question if you didn't say it. I'm going to direct this question to first Vitalik. Is this feasible?
I mean, I think lots of things are feasible. I mean, okay, I think okay, so for the public goods funding side of things, like this, like public goods funding in general is like always two problems in one, right? One problem is how to direct the money, and then the other problem is where to get the money. And like the two are interconnected, right? Because people are going to be more willing to give you money if they think that it's going to be used sanely, right? But like where the money's coming from is like one of those other pieces that I think is also really valuable to work on, and that I think we really like haven't gone into yet, right? And I mean, obviously, Optimism has done a lot with their RPGF rounds. Another good one to shout out that seemingly no one has heard of is Octant. It's basically a group of Ethereum companies that are staking their ETH and giving a portion of the revenues to public goods funding. And like I'm seeing different groups experiment and like talk about these like different structures where you basically have consortiums of people or projects, and then there's a kind of pledge to fund public goods through a common mechanism as part of that. So I think like figuring that part out is important. And then like one of the things, right, is that if you want to get like small scale, then you can just get like individual donations and like individual projects, small projects, right? But that if you want to go large scale, and if you want to get to like larger and larger type scale protocols, and especially if you want something to be able to get to sort of get credible neutrality points while at the same time as funding public goods, like you really want the mechanism to be unexploitable, to have a good track record. I shouldn't say unexploitable, but like a clearly limited in exploitability, right? And so like this is part of why I think like I don't really believe in one master mechanism, and I generally believe in multiple mechanisms where each of the mechanisms itself sort of has a lot of heavy smoothing in terms of distributing funding and distributing power. And I think a lot of the mechanisms that we've talked about are good at doing that. So the more like I think that's the sort of thing where we'll be able to climb up the ladder over time. I mean, or who knows, like maybe someone will just like make a new animal coin and it'll go to $20 million and they'll just like stick 60% of the supply into a public goods gadget. Anything can happen, right?
I mean, is that what I did?
Let's see, is it up to $20 billion? And well, 20 is a high bar. Oh wow, even Tron is not at 20. Lido staked ETH is. No, come on. Like, you need to have like scale, especially if you want to like compete with the big players, and especially on like the big budget stuff, whether it's like hardware or like replacing the World Health Organization or whatever, right? So, but.
Yep. I love the fact that you actually broke down the two side, which is like, well, the money generation side oftentimes has been less effective in the past. Now it seems like with at least with the automation, not even talking about autonomy yet, that the surplus could be unleashed. Technically, even if we keep doing the same things, seems to be greater. And that we can actually experiment at a greater scale with our mechanisms to fund what needs to be funded, such as free open source software. But is there a ceiling that we haven't really solved for in the circulation or the regeneration of where's the real yield? When is that going to come, right? Like, I mean, like printing animal or cartoon avatar coins are not really sustainable. There still needs to be real yield. So where do you see the A help us
Hmm.
unlock in terms of a real yield.
Hmm. Yeah, and for that, ultimately, yeah, you have to provide some kind of real service that brings real value to people, right? And that's obviously a challenge to do with these purely virtual contraptions that are basically like operating over these network effects. I definitely think that whatever the solution is, it will be something that just comes out of complete left field and will be unexpected, right? In 2021, nobody was predicting dog coins, and so we got dog coins. In 2025, or 27, we're not going to get dog coins. What is the thing that we're going to get? I think it's in open field, and it's still a lot of possibilities.
Yeah,
I think we should give credit. I'm sorry, go for it.
Oh no, I was gonna say like mine's maybe like slightly more hot take on this, but like I think it's also a mix of like changing some like social expectations and validation. So people love to do things and feel good about their social status and how that impacted their view among their peers. So like people buy designer goods. Like LVMH is one of the biggest companies in the world. People care about social status. So I actually think that like instead of leaning away from this kind of stuff, I actually think there could be like like awards for like, oh, which companies like contributed most to the public goods, and like these are actually like widely, like it's like watching the Oscars, or it's like winning a Nobel Prize. And so like or if you donate a certain amount, you get this like badge that's like that's widely displayed in like very public places. So I am actually like a big fan of like how can we like also add some like social pressure and validation elements to it. Like there's like the giving pledge where it's like, oh, you're a billionaire and you donate a certain percentage, you get to attend this like conference of all the other billionaires that donated, and they actually like really like doing this, and that's why some of them actually do it. I've talked to some of them before, and that was a reason they get to meet all the other billionaires. So it's like I think that we can't, like, humans are just going to naturally like this kind of stuff, and I'm okay like leaning into that in the event that it helps public goods.
I also think the other interesting phenomenon we've seen is and we were kind of part of this, is like the bootstrapping of public goods with meme coins, where there's kind of a mix of like it's fun and it's kind of edgy, and then there's also like a mindshare component, like, oh, other people are also using this. And I think there's definitely like a lot of price discovery, and you have people who like don't know anything about open source, like speculating on these projects at scale. Like I've had people like take my code and put it into Claude and be like, well, Claude said it wasn't good. Like, okay, there's been a lot of funny things that happen, but we shouldn't discount how much fun is part of this, and that like in a world where attention like is really a big fundamental to getting people to know you exist and to come work with you on stuff and to even like be a contributor to your project, like building in some of the fun and virality to that is definitely like valuable. And I think maybe that's kind of priced into meme coins a bit, like, okay, well, maybe there is like the how this generates revenue is unclear today, but if there is enough attention on it and enough like smart people working on it, then it kind of like then maybe they'll figure it out. I don't know, but definitely there's a lot of speculation, and what I did not expect this year was how much speculation on open source projects specifically there has been, and maybe there's more public goods could go in that direction, and maybe agents could kind of drive a lot of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I could give one specific idea, which is so you basically take things like the Protocol Guild Pledge and things like the GPL, and you stick them together, right? So what I mean by things like the Protocol Guild Pledge, right, is basically, there's a bunch of projects that are pledging to give 1% of the revenue, 1% of their token to Protocol Guild, and I actually think that it might be valuable also to create pledges that are kind of larger, but also more generically scoped, in the sense of like the category should be public goods funding mechanisms where that are rules based and where both the power and the recipient base are highly distributed, right? And I actually think like Protocol Guild satisfies those properties reasonably well, and like even quadratic funding, retro funding, deep funding, and all of those also do. But a 5-person grant making body where like that just decides everything does not, right? And then, so like ideally we should have multiple mechanisms, right? But then the nice thing about pledges is that, I mean, I think as we've seen with OpenAI, it's very easy for projects to come and have good intentions when they start out and when they're very small, right? And, you know, it's still very idealist, kumbaya, we're going to improve the world. But then as we saw with OpenAI, you know, first they gave up openness for safety, and then they gave up safety for world domination, and now we have neither, right? And so we, you know, we want to avoid like you want something that like sticks, right? And obviously OpenAI's board structure ended up failing that test. But like the nice, the more you can create things where like you make commitments early on, and like the fine. The OpenAI like board thing ultimately failed, but it did add some friction, right? But you know, the more you can add commitments that are kind of early on, and the more those commitments can be things that like stick and affect your behavior to some even as a thing becomes large, the more I think like you actually can create these like long-term sustainable streams. And then on top of that, so this is where the GPL part comes in, right? Is that basically I think we should figure out a way to design the pledge in such a way that one of the things in your pledge is to somehow preferentially interact with other organizations that make the same pledge. I mean, and then if you do that, then you know, you're basically creating this like ecosystem of projects that are actually sort of creating marginal incentives that try to reinforce each other, right? And so you're not creating something that like feels very coercive, where there's like a hard, you know, like 100% tariff sort of boundary between the inside and the outside, right? Like you want like these overlapping sort of recursive bubbles that all point in different directions to different things. And the more your thing commits to having long-term incentives that are aligned with other people's, the more you get benefits from those other projects as well, right? So that's like, if we can set up an ecosystem that works like that, then I think that's also another way to fund lots of things very sustainably. And then on top of that, the pledges don't just have to be about funding. The pledges can also be about things like, hey, things you do should be open source.
I just love how I heard some familiar terms that you know, may have been popularly discussed in this hacker house: recursive value attribution, and also cross-holding of upside. Well, sharing of the upside of multiple groups of people coming together. Yeah, I think there will be a lot of experiment in this direction. So that's exciting. That said, I think that Kartik reminded us there is an excellent audience question, which is what if increased autonomy, as in the DAO context, will lead to certain negative externalities from disgruntled agents? But agents are not just robots. Like, you know, we could be agents too, like, you know, agency. There's a long theory of study in terms of like agency from the line of work in literature and economics. But like this question, what is motivating is that there's many things we have seen happen in the past by other humans in other failed DAO journeys: burning token, taking over DAOs, polluting communication channels, all of the stuff we already know. But so who holds the responsibility when self-destructing actions are made in DAOs by non-humans who may not be sensitive to financial incentives inside orgs?
I know, Vitalik, you wrote on this, kind of like who's responsible for running the models, essentially.
Right. Yeah. Oh, wow. This gets into one of those really big cans of worms. I mean, okay, so there's like the whole kind of legal engineering question of like how to create liability rules for this, and ideally, like make those rules in a way that doesn't like basically incentivize like centralization as the easiest form of risk management. And then there's also the question of like how that feeds into social norms, because I think in general, you know, the more that we can lean on social norms rather than liability, I do think it's like healthier up to some point. so like if, for example, you have a rule that says that like you're responsible for something that was done by a model that's downstream of your actions, where you're kind of the immediately upstream actor, then that inherently makes it more risky to do like very extreme autonomy things, right? And it makes it inherently less risky to do things where you continue to be in like in regular control, right? So that's like one of those types of options. I think another axis that we can lean on is as software developers, we can also try to work on software that makes kind of human in the loop approaches to AI that like actually work more efficiently, right? Because I think a lot of the time, like the reason why the like full autonomy meme is very appealing is because like it appeals to laziness, and like we have very crappy ways of like actually providing input, whether individually or collectively, to a lot of these kinds of constructions, right? And that's like not really something that we generally see in any of these AI toolkits. So like better work on just any kind of human interface technology is one of those things that I consider super high value. I mean, otherwise, like there's a lot of different levers. It's a hackathon. We can figure things out.
Well, just following up what Vitalik said, Shaw, as someone who's in this panel having been working on the agent stuff, what can we do today to actually better defend our DAOs from the increased potential autonomy of agents and these kind of threats?
I think we're still kind of in theoretical land, where like we kind of vaguely know that these tools are going to change everything, and we just have to do a lot of engineering. So like, I kind of would say that like accelerating the development and like just getting to the point where there are vulnerabilities we have to explore. Like nobody's really gotten hurt from an AI yet. I'm sure that will happen at some point, and I'd argue that maybe happening sooner than later would reduce the risk of catastrophe by sort of like pushing people in the direction of like, oh, maybe there's like problems here. You could say, okay, well, somebody like downloaded Replica and had a weird parasocial relationship, but I just don't think it's gotten that weird. So in some ways, I think like we need to like actually explore the space and like try to solve some of these problems practically. And I'm sure that a lot of risks will reveal themselves. And I think there's a lot of like vague risk from the kind of safetyist community of like, instrumental convergence or these like very big long-termist kind of ideas. But the real problems are like super practical, and there's this kind of ongoing like, well, can we actually prevent an AI from getting red teamed or from being prompt injected or whatever? And I think that there's probably like the more prompt injection becomes a thing, the more incentive there is to solve the problem. And so it's like kind of creating incentives for the right solutions to emerge is probably what we want to see next. I'm an accelerationist, I guess, in that way.
What about Kevin? You have so many mechanisms on your allo capital. It's fascinating. It was a rabbit hole. So like what mechanisms do you think we can use to better defend ourselves?
Yeah. Well, I was going to say maybe we should only accelerate the defensive things and the decentralized things and decelerate the offensive things. And over time, the defensive things will win. Someone should come up with that philosophy. So yeah, I'm just shitposting. Vitalik came up with this philosophy of DAC, which I think is like a great way of thinking about these things, like accelerating the defensive technologies in democratic and decentralized technologies. And I think that that's kind of the way that we want to go. We want to accelerate defensive tech and the stuff that has a huge blast radius and could cause existential risk to humanity. Is the stuff that we probably don't want to accelerate as much. And that's easier said than done, I think, though, because it's hard to know when you're in R&D stage whether a tech you're developing will be defensive or offensive. But I'm happy to talk next at the object level about capital allocation mechanisms, since that's what you asked about, Tina, or happy to volley this over to Vitalik to talk about DAC if that's interesting to him. Either way works for me.
First, capital allocation.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so we're spinning out a new venture from Gitcoin called Capital, and it's just all about different capital allocation mechanisms. Gitcoin got started with quadratic funding, and I'm super thankful to Glenn Weil and Zoe Hitzig and Vitalik for inventing that mechanism. But we've just learned that there's a ton of different mechanisms out there for funding your ecosystems, public goods. And so I've been spending the last year more or less cartographying the different mechanisms, from quadratic funding to retro funding to deep funding to conviction voting to cookie jars to AI capital allocation to social media capital allocation. There's just a smorgasbord of different ways that we can fund what matters in the 21st century. And because of the primitives that blockchain gives us, decentralization, credible neutrality, transparency, corruption resistance, we can build better systems for funding public goods in the 21st century. And to me, that's one of the most exciting design spaces to be working on right now. And I think that not only does it make us more effective as an Ethereum ecosystem to have funding of what matters, but also I think it's going to bring the autonomous and put it back into DAOs, because I think funding the public goods of your DAO and DAO governance are kind of the same problem. They converge in many important ways. So and I think that like once we prove that it works in Ethereum, then we can go to the Department of Government Efficiency and say, hey, can we put some of the state functions on chain and do them more efficiently and effectively than ever before? And so, this is a beautiful frontier for me on chain capital allocation, and we're going to explore it over at Capital, which, as I said, just spun out of Gitcoin. So if things go well, you will see us building a Swiss Army knife of many different capital allocation mechanisms, and then people who are building ecosystems will be able to use those tools in order to autonomously fund what matters in those ecosystems. So it's a very exciting design space for sure.
Ken? Oh, I see.
Kartik's
Kartik
coming off
popping up.
to play us off the stage.
So closing
Ring the bell.
Ken, with sitting on so much money, capital, right, before launching mechanisms, what are you going to enable? You have 1 minute.
Okay, heavy optimizations for financialization of all market microstructures. I think when we think about Uniswap, you tend to think of this old, not old, but like Uniswap is a DEX. But with V4, you really have the opportunity to build much more robust and comprehensive microstructures or market structures for each hook pool can itself be its own AMM. And so when we think about that as a financialized economy, you can think about how each one lives in its own ecosystem, but how they all compose.
We lost him.
It looks like
This is a part.
Let me assure you, it was not us. I'm not that cruel.
It's a signal. It's a signal. But well, I think that he's coming back.
You're back.
Finish the sentence.
Shut me down. Market microstructures. But okay, so what I wanted to really touch into is I think hooks are really great within Uniswap V4 to build new market microstructures, like how you want to customize a certain pool, how you really want to customize how people swap. And then more to that is really sort of the larger interop picture for all of Ethereum, right? How does Uniswap, as you think about liquidity existing across chains, how do solvers plug into this, and how do routers really kind of fill orders as you go throughout the different structures across ecosystems, and how you execute across chain? So that is where I think heavy optimizations come from an agentic perspective. And I think it's really cool to really think about Uniswap not just as a DEX, but really as like core infrastructure for executing transactions all across chain. I'll stop there.
Yeah, lots of experiment. And since I think that Vitalik has written multiple excellent blogs on DAC. So I think that it's probably best to leave that async. That said, I do want to ask Shaw one sentence. What is the one thing this month, this quarter, Ethereum can help you concretely? Say it, and we'll do it.
I really think that a plugin registry for us, and then just more generally an agent registry, would be like the really compelling thing to start doing. Otherwise, it would make managing our ecosystem a lot easier. And yeah, so I think that would be the first thing. I think putting that on contracts.
Awesome. Well, I think that the beauty of Ethereum and why we're here is because we're here for each other. So hopefully you come back and you stay, and let's make something beautiful happen. Great. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, Karthik, for letting us go over time for 30 minutes.
Of course. This was awesome. That's why we're happy to continue. And thank you so much for sharing all of your thoughts. And thanks, Tina, for moderating.